Hello and welcome to Drive Through HR, where discussions about HR, talent, technology, and workplace trends are always on the menu. I'm Robin Schooling, along with my co host, Michael Vandervoort. Hey, Mike.
Hey, Robin, how are you?
I am good. I'm in fighting mode. I'm fit as a fiddle. And you're on the verge of under the weather, huh?
I traveled for the first time in a while last week, and I think I picked up something on a plane. So yeah, got a little bit of a scratchy throat, but otherwise ready to go. So let's bring our guest aboard.
Let us bring our guests aboard. One of our favorite guests over all these years. And I always love having a conversation with her. So, Deb, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. Tell our audience about yourself and your acuity.
Well, thanks for having me back, Robin and Michael. And also, I love being here. We always say that, and then we should do it more often.
Mhm.
Exactly.
There's time in between. But anyways, I am Deb Muller. I am the founder and CEO of HR Acuity. And if you're not familiar with HR Acuity, we are a purpose-built platform for employer relations and workplace investigations everywhere from intake all the way through aftercare. We work with customers from some of the largest companies in the world to really help them drive trust and mitigate risk through thoughtful, proactive employee relations practices and data. So that's who I am. I mean, and the other thing about me is I am a recovering HR professional. So before I started this, I did all that stuff and knew there was a better way to do employee relations and embarked on this journey almost 20 years ago.
Oh, well, yeah, and it's wild because um, as part of your company, kind of the work you do and the help, the services that you provide to your clients, you've done. I'm a big fan of the thought leadership and stuff that you guys have
Mhm.
done over the 10 years or so. I guess you a lot of resources, a lot of great community. Empower. We'll chat about that at some point, but you also do an event, which I know is Chatham House Rules and all that, but you bring about 150 people together, your employee relations roundtable. You just ran that. You work with my company on another event, similar nature. So we're, kind of we're out there doing trying to do good work on the employee relations and the labor relations side. So I'd love to hear. We're going to kind of talk about, we're doing one of those, but what's coming around the corner in 2026, right?
And
We're gonna talk about some of the trends and stuff that people shared with you, obviously without attribution because we can't name names, but we're gonna talk about some of the things that you guys talked about, and so tell us, I guess, to start off, fresh off the roundtable in Boston, I think in October, tell us what stood out as the biggest shift employee relations leaders say they're preparing for as we head into 2026, and there's a few to pick from, I think.
Yeah, we had a
right.
lot of good discussion. And just to sort of follow up on that, the roundtable was sort of something that sort of organically came as we started putting this software out there and we started talking to more and more folks who were leading employee relations, something that was really sort of becoming a function back then. And, people would say, oh my God, like I found my people. Like it was so new that they didn't know that other people were doing the same thing. So we brought this
Mhm.
group together. It's grown over the years. It's really become sort of a marquee event and sort of my highlight of my year when we bring together about 150 leaders to talk about what's going on. So this year in Boston, it felt a little different, sort of the level of gravity. A lot's been going on in ER. ER sort of changed and been thrown a lot of new challenges. In the past, we talked a lot about standing up the function, centralizing or not, sort of very sort of, the nuts and bolts of putting this together. But this year, everybody that comes for the most part, these are large organizations, has an ER function. And the shift was really towards how do we mature it? How do we evolve with the environment that's sort of throwing things at us? How do we scale it? How do we make it defensible under this sort of constant pressure? So, really interesting conversation from the leaders about this workplace being this intersection of personal identity, political expression, professional accountability. We used to stay outside of the walls. Now it just shows up instantly at work. It shows up very publicly. And I think that's really, what the conversation was. And so, how do we take that as we shifted to 2026 and really continue this move from being very reactive, sort of a cleanup function, which is certainly when I was doing HR, that was sort of what it was, to really being more of a predictor of trust in the organization, really being able to help with risk in an organization, seeing that risk earlier, intervening sooner, not just responding sort of after harm.
Yeah, I bet it was fascinating because anything about everything to do with the workplace this year seems to be, I mean, it's just so volatile. We don't know from one day to the next what sort of executive order I'm using air quotes as I say that, is gonna be signed and, you know, put something in place or cut something out or whatever. Oh, yeah, I mean, how did those conversations go around that? It's like whiplash.
Yeah, I think now people have to realize that it's not just about one single regulation.
Ah,
It's on it because we don't know where it's going to go from day to day, and sort of it's the instability itself. Obviously, all enforcement priorities are sort of shifting daily. The DEI
yeah,
framework is still being challenged. Some report today about some of the larger organizations and still pulling things away. States are very different, and
yeah,
very few organizations have employees just in one state. Maybe smaller
yeah,
ones do. So managing that, and then global is sort of on the other side, where there's sort of stricter standards in Europe and other regions. I mean, Brazil is about to enforce new regulation in March, which about whistleblowers and bringing in harassment data that companies need to actually maintain. So the direct
yeah,
opposite of what we're seeing. So I think, that continues to be an issue. Sort of the curveballs ER teams are seeing is this, again, the explosion or continual explosion of politically and socially charged workplace conflict driven by social media,
mhm,
the activism, and
mhm,
how do you manage those conflicts in real time? And I think 2025, 2024, the Gaza-Israeli conflict or war, a lot of lessons learned there. And at the end of the day, what we talk about is what can you control in your own organization?
yeah,
Because outside not there. So how do
yeah,
you do that? And sort of the kind of the drumbeat is, look, lean into your values of your organization. That's something you do have control over what you talk about, control of what you put in place. And we're seeing some just interesting things that organizations are doing. Let me think about a couple. Social media organizations now sort of they've been through it, the ringer. They've made mistakes. They've done
mhm,
things well. A lot of them have put sort of social media risk matrices in place. When do we how do we respond? How do we evaluate whether something, is something we have to respond to, whether it references the employer, whether there's hate speech, reputational harms?
mm,
How do we respond to them? Less undisciplined, maybe more on education and coaching. So
yeah,
it's interesting. Yeah.
I'm gonna interject real quick because this is something you talked about when we were together a few months ago, is the idea of trust. Because trust
mm,
is kind of broken right now, right? And I know, like you said, investigations and people knowing that the company's gonna do, there's a lot of that in the ER side. But, like, and we're gonna talk about AI as well, and, like, you can't, like, how do we do trust right now? I don't think anybody really, I don't think, like, it
no,
just feels like
trust each other, yeah,
broken.
It's hard. I mean, I think, it is when we think about ER, I mean, it is that balancing of trust and risk, and my philosophy is, look, if you build trust with your employees through transparency, through process, the risk will mitigate itself. Like, you've
mhm,
gotta get
mhm,
ahead of that. And the other thing we're leaning through, Michael, as you know, is really thinking about how do we measure that? How do we look at that? And I think there's a couple things that we can do. First of all, we are really starting to share with the community. We did a breakout at the function of labor vision. We also did another, actually more in-depth one at the
Mhm.
roundtable about what we're calling this trust and risk statement. How do we take the data that we have and actually identify areas of indication if we have trust or we don't, or where it's breaking or where it's changing? And it's exciting for me because we are finally moving from let's count the number of cases to let's start looking at the data in a much more strategic way than we used to before. I'm excited about that because I think trust is one of the things that we can really show. We can show how that aligns with the risk in organization, because I think, people are much less trusting of a lot of things around them.
yeah,
Talk about the government. Do you trust it? Do you not? What's going on? So it is one place for, or we want our employees to come and really, trust.
And it kinda gives you something to, I mean, you kinda talked about also as, having a balance sheet, like, that ER and LR should have a balance sheet that goes from business, like, everybody knows how to do that in accounting, but we don't really know how to do that in HR. So,
That
like,
is what I say. What is a P&L, right? It tells
yeah,
the financial health of an organization, and it transcends organizations. It doesn't matter where you are, you're in finance, you go to your new company, you don't say to them, "Hey, what do you guys use to evaluate the health of the organization financially?" Like, of course they use the P&L, and that's where we want to get to. And this trust and risk, or a TNR, because why not? We can have some initials too, is really giving a framework. So we're really excited about this. We did work in both of those sessions that we talked about. We're actually about to roll out sort of the framework to the community to get people to start socializing it, show them how they can start small depending upon the maturity of your organization. And it really focuses around three areas: operational efficiency. How are we doing as an ER organization? Because so many organizations now have dedicated ER functions. And even if you
Mhm.
don't, there are things you can look at. How are we responding to things? Do we have the right number of people? How do we benchmark that against others? Then the next is trust. How are our employees experiencing what's happening? We can be running efficiently, but if the experience they're having is bad, we're going to lose trust there. So looking at psychological safety, are they willing to come forward? What's happening at the end of it? Are we losing people? Are they, is there attrition or retention issues after issues? So there's definitely data there. And then risk. What's the risk in our organization and what's the cost of it? And we have some metrics that I think are pretty exciting because they're dollar driven, right? They're
Mhm.
things your CFO is going to look at, your COO, your CEO is going to be inclined to look at perhaps in a little bit different ways. So, for example, legal cost per thousand employees, right? So decide amongst yourselves in ER and your legal team, what are the costs associated with bad things happening in ER, whether it's legal letters or settlements or severance. Decide what those are. Every organization is going to be different. It's not going to be perfect, but let's get consistent on measuring that year over year, quarter over quarter, depending upon how big your organization is. And then what is the dollar value? Divide that amount by the number of employees you have. What's the legal cost per employee, regardless of whether or not they've been an issue? And look at that trend. Is it going up or is it going down in your organization? And that's a really great metric. And actually, the reason I came up with that was going from HR to being the CEO of a company. I pay attention to our financials, just that our P&L, very important to me. The KPIs that we look at as an organization, very important to me. And one of the metrics as a software company that we look at all the time is our ARR, our annual recurring revenue per employee, right? How are we scaling? Are we scaling efficiently as a company? And I thought, okay, well, how are we, what's our legal costs per employee, right? You can do the same thing with performance management. We can look at the number, but what does that aggregate number mean? Well, let's look at it per employee. If
Mm.
we do some more training with our managers or we give them more skills, that number should come down, right? It shows our investments working. If ER is doing different things to help preventatively make sure performance management is working, is that coming down? So we're excited about the TNR. The nice thing about it is we're outlining it in a way that any organization can adopt it. There's probably about 20 different metrics. Most organizations are not going to be ready for those 20 metrics, but there might be 3, there might be 2, just a way to get started.
It makes me think about I walked into an organization once as the in-house HR leader, and it was a highly frontline staff, right? It was hospitality, and the management style there was, anytime somebody blew their nose the wrong way, oh, let's do a disciplinary form, right? Call it what you will, right? The action notice, whatever, right? Do a write up, quote write up. And I mean, these were the days of paper too, right? So we were drowning in paper. So what the heck? And all it meant was these managers were not having conversations or coaching or anything like that. It was just the dance of paper. And so I called it the management culture number. And I tracked, I had our HR department track when they would come in because they all had to be filed, right? We tracked how many there were and used that as a metric and we kind of had to get that baseline to start because nobody believed me. Oh, it can't be that bad. Yeah. Right. And so it was a very simple calculation of, here's the number of quote discipline notices, no matter the level, right? Divided by the number of employees.
Yeah. It's something you can track and you could look at by manager, by department, and then even tie that to, well, is it actually helping?
Yep,
Are we having
exactly.
better performance, or are we just having a lot of turnover that then we
Yep.
on that hamster wheel?
Yep. It was again, it was thinking that way of how can we explain this and categorize it so that our managers, our leaders, whoever will understand it, and employees as well. Hey, we're going to improve this. We're going to vow to improve X by having conversations instead of writing, stuff.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
We took a left turn from the questions there,
Yes,
but
we
that
did.
was thanks to
Surprise you, Michael?
Let's dive into the AI piece because I think that that's interesting because you've mentioned previously about AI becoming infrastructure, right? I mean, and I think we're seeing that in our day-to-day work. The three of us sitting here do for sure.
use it all
What
day
does
long.
exactly? So what does that mean? AI becoming infrastructure. What does that mean inside of an ER function?
Yeah, I mean, when I say AI is becoming infrastructure, I mean, it's moving from sort of these pilot projects to really being embedded directly
Yeah.
into daily ER workflow. We're seeing teams using AI to structure their intake, draft interview questions, summarize interviews, timelines, build timelines, prepare summaries. So it's really being used, at least this is how we're seeing it also from a technology standpoint, and we think the right way to use it is to speed up the mechanical
Mm,
parts of the ER
mm,
work, that sort of manual stuff, so that people can really focus on judgment, analysis, human connection. What it's not doing and it shouldn't do is make credibility
yeah.
assessments, determine discipline. Those remain human responsibilities, but it's sort of that underneath work that can really improve consistency, throughput, ownership, and accountability, which I think is really exciting. I think I said once, ER folks may get what they've always asked for. We want time to be more strategic, but we're sort of in the muck. Well, guess what?
Yeah. Mm,
AI is gonna allow you to deliver that, and I think it's really exciting, and we're in our own technology, we're being very thoughtful and intentional, but we're trying things that maybe we didn't believe could happen, we're working on. We're just about to release a timeline so they could, go through all the notes and everything and just sort of put in paper, like, when people said this. But the most important or the most, I think, exciting part about it, the timeline, it does a nice job and it tells you where the data is, sort of streamlines that for you. But it will also give you observations. Hey, this person said there were no witnesses. This person said there were two witnesses. Maybe you should go back and pressure check. Like, they were all there. Like, what's going on? It's not saying someone's being deceitful and someone's being
mhm,
honest. It's just showing you where there are maybe contradictions,
mm.
corroborations that you need to be aware of. So I think those are things that we're excited about, taking time to queue things up for people when you have a high workload, lots of opportunity there. And then that's where I think it just becomes part of what we do.
I love it because a lot of it is it can become like your brainstorming work partner. Like yesterday, I
Yeah,
had this
yeah.
request. Somebody asked us to look at doing a pretty complicated piece of research. I wasn't even really like I was like, I don't even know where I would start with that. So I asked ChatGPT, and it not only said, "Start here," right? Like, once I kind of explained what I was looking for, it started saying, "And this would be the and I mean, it started building out a work like a research plan that you could and I was a little bit flabbergasted because I didn't ask it to do that, and I
Yeah.
didn't test it. We wound up not doing the work, but it was amazing, and it would if it was right, it would have saved me probably, a dozen hours.
The words you just said, if it was right. So,
Exactly.
as long as you're using it as a collaborator and you're sort of giving it the tough test and you're saying, "Yeah, I just asked it for some research of something that I'm writing right now," and I'm like, "Can you find me research that might support this?" And it quickly came back with all this research. I'm like, "Oh my god, this is so great." Until I started clicking into it and it wasn't
Mhm.
there. And then I went back and I'm like, "Excuse me," like, and they're like, "Oh, you're right, it's not there." So that obviously is still a concern, and I think when people understand sort of the capabilities and the downside of it, and
The
they use it
limitations,
in
yeah.
that way and challenge it, some
Mhm.
of our tech that we're doing, like it's we're not relying on one LLM, we're using another one to actually be the tester, right? To test it and sort of, pit them against each other, which, they work they
Yeah.
they do well.
So we talked a little bit about this in a session we did together at Labor Vision. Let's just real quick talk about governance. So
Yeah.
it's not always right, it does that, but like you have a software company and you've incorporated it into your product. And I know a lot of HR people are struggling with, are trying to figure that out. So what have you figured out that it should be some of the best practices there?
Yeah, and some of this comes from our roundtable as well. I mean, I think the companies are sort of at different areas of the spectrum as to where they're leaning in, and but they can't avoid this, right? They can't avoid it. So I think the smart companies are leaning into it, but they're doing it with guardrails. They're treating it like any other sort of high risk system. It's not casual. So what did we hear at the roundtable? Cross functional AI governance groups are coming up, right?
Mm.
ER, legal, privacy. They're getting all together. Nothing gets sort of piloted without going through that group. Use cases are sort of approved as they go through, which I think is a really, really good thing to continue going. We heard a lot of sort of hypotheticals or scenarios about making sure that in ER, the first thing is, okay, this is not in the internet, it's just within our company. Well, that's also a problem. We heard
Yeah.
a story about an employee who went in and said, "What's all the stuff that's written about me out there?" Right? And was able to actually get information. So one of the companies, talked about how, they're walled off, right? Only their
Mm.
information can go certain places. So they really have to sort of go that extra step further to make sure things are happening. We talked about things like transcription tools. I always sort of ask, are people recording things? Old school. We don't record interviews. We don't record investigations. But with transcription tools, you're doing that. And I actually, on the flip side, now see the benefit of that because it's verbatim, right? You can't say
Right.
I didn't say that in an interview. It is right there. But there's also concerns about that too. Whether the transcripts are automatically shared. Who do they go to? Are they able to capture dialects that are different? Are people going back and checking the notes, right? So they're like, "Oh, that was recorded, it's transcribed, I have tons and tons of paper," but maybe something didn't get said properly, and months later,
Mhm.
you're not gonna be able to understand the
Mhm.
gobbledygook that might have been in there. So and again, it doesn't get context, right? It's not listening, it's not hearing, and so those pages and pages of transcripts, which, by the way, when you transcribe something, it's a lot longer than your notes 'cause
Yeah.
up everything, does that set you up? So it's, some companies are prohibiting it, recording in one-on-one meetings, in investigations, some are using it, and we're gonna see.
I think like everything else, that's going to work its way out once we get some case law out there, you know?
For sure, sure.
Well, and that's something I don't know that this is new, but it's something that crept more into my perception recently because it seems like a lot of people in the HR legal side or employment law side are talking about it, and that is discovery. Like
Yeah, yeah,
how people are using tools. Do people know that the stuff they're doing and the questions they're asking, are going to be subject to and all that kind of thing.
yeah,
So
Now it's
yep.
all written down and recorded, right? So if it ends up in litigation, like your name's on it, like it's not AI, it's how you chose to do the investigation, and
yeah, so there's a lot there.
yeah. I mean, my biggest concern is I think there's some really responsible people out there that know how to use this, present company, of course, but, people, their tendency is to find the path of least resistance. And as they get more comfortable with it, maybe it's right 75, 80%. I don't, maybe it doesn't hallucinate most of the time. And so the tendency of humans will be to just assume, especially when they're rushed, especially when caseload is high, to just let it go. So which is why we're not doing we're not writing your report for you in HR Acuity. Might find another tool to do that. We are not doing that. We're
Mhm,
going to give you
mhm.
tools to write it, to help you to write it better, to remove names and put in initials if you want to non it. We'll make that easier, professional, but we're not going to write it for you. And even if you say, well, wait, there'll be a little checkbox on the bottom where you can say that you've reviewed it. To that I say, I walked into the UPS store, sent something the other day, and they asked me to read the terms and conditions and check that I read them, and I hadn't, and I checked it.
I think
Yeah.
you're up, Robin.
Yeah, another sort of top of mind topic conversation lately across HR has been about stress and burnout. But let's dive into for ER teams specifically. What is the state of mental health and burnout inside ER teams? What did folks say at the roundtable about that?
I mean, it was one of the toughest conversations, and this
Uh,
comes up a lot. I mean, we know just from our data that overall case volume from our benchmark report, and we have a benchmark report, we do it every year. It's on our website, you can download it. Overall case volume declined in 2024. We do it once a year, so we'll
mm,
be redoing it in early 2026. But discrimination, harassment, retaliation claims record highs. So those are the
wow.
most complex ones. And
Wow.
for the first time, we actually measured case complexity. So we're looking at not just a case as a singular case, but how many issues
Yep.
are sort of in there, multiple issues rather than just a single allegation. So fewer cases, but each one is materially heavier for that
Mm,
person. So we're really looking at it because we think that really reflects a true burden for your team and something for you to look at because of that burnout, because of understanding, do you need more people? Are they carrying things? And I think, carrying these layered matters does often combine mental health concerns or retaliation fear or what's going
mhm.
safety issues, far less sort of straightforward cases than there were a year ago. And so we're looking at How do we look at that? How do we help our employee relations folks because the workload design is getting sort of different. What we're hearing is the healthiest teams are really kind of separating out sort of higher judgment ER work from the routine management cases so they can really measure that better.
Mm.
Basic performance, documentation, earlier conflict coaching, sort of trying to systemize that or, give that to maybe another group of people, enabling the managers to take that away as well, because it's just too much to have together. So we're seeing a lot of that through sort of more structured workflows, allowing ER to stay focused on sort of the really high risk, more
Yep.
complex matters, but giving them some breathing room. But there's this breaking point, and I think we need to look at that. Hopefully, AI will help with that, with the caseloads, with the debriefs. But there is this acknowledgement. ER really absorbs this sort of organizational
Mhm.
trauma and
Mhm.
scale. Getting it all, they're getting it all in there.
The complexity piece is great. I think we're also seeing, like, with the you mentioned early on, you mentioned, like, the shifting, emphasis of the EOC on charges and different, like, so there's, like, more religious discrimination charges that, like, they're gonna become very prevalent. I mean, they're rising
Different and
already.
different that we were used to in a way that we were not used to looking at these things.
Yeah, and so there's that as I mean, there's that as well, and I mean, the people are they kinda they knew the flow, they kinda knew the cadence of the
Yep, yep.
agencies, and now that's all disrupted, right?
Yeah, how are they gonna rule? Your own sort of belief system, I mean, it's very different. How do you bring that in and sort of remain unbiased? I think that becomes harder in this environment as well, and that puts a toll on people. Like, am I truly looking at this through unbiased eyes? And how do we give that sort of emotional support to employee relations professionals? So we're talking about it, which is good. A lot of it comes towards investment and whether there's enough people, and that's why the data is so important to show that, to get the resources and understand the impact of having the right resources to do ER on the organization will allow organizations to justify that.
We're running up on time, and we've only gotten through, like, half the questions, so I'm gonna combine a couple of them real quick. One of them is, like, you just talked about data and all this stuff. What if you're a smaller shop, not a Fortune 500 company? How do in this environment, what advice do you have? And then tell us what the one thing that you think is really gonna shock people in 2026 is, if there is such a thing.
All right. So for small companies or mid-sized companies, I think you don't need a large ER department. It's not possible. It doesn't make sense. But you just need some fundamentals. So first you need a clear and safe speak up channel. Like you need to find a place for people to speak up, not when the house is on fire, but just when
Mm,
something feels off. Like, I mean, we didn't talk about this whole like the yellow light. You got to live in the yellow lights, I call them, sort of
Mhm.
those deviations from the norm. They tell you so much. That is how you predict the bigger things. And so you need people to feel comfortable coming forward when someone just told a bad joke and it made them uncomfortable. Let's nip it in the bud. Let's get to that. Let's make sure it's not happening in other areas. Robin, back to your conversation about all that paper, like being able to put
Mhm.
that together and to tell a story. Secondly, you need a documented investigation process and people need to know that. So when things go wrong, don't we got you. We got you. People don't expect perfection. They just know that when something happens, does their company do they have their back or are they going to ignore them? And by their back doesn't mean they're going to necessarily agree with them, but there's something in place to help them. So you have to have a documented investigation process and have people that understand how to do investigations properly. There should be at least one trained and accountable ER owner. If you're really small, at least one person that's sort of hearing everything. And again, a very small company. And find a simple way to review the patterns, even quarterly. If you're really small, maybe you don't have too many patterns, but just start looking at it. Benchmark organizations of your size to see what's happening out there. Find a group of people you can talk to. Michael, you mentioned it. We have our Empower community. So important for those smaller organizations. It is free. You can join the labor group that Michael leads there, which is great if you're in a unionized environment or an environment that you don't want to be unionized. That too, we didn't even get there. Such a great feed where you as a small, in a small company, maybe you're managing a lot of hats, you can go and ask a question and you're gonna get so many folks who have dealt with it before and who are so willing to help you out. So I really
Mhm.
encourage folks in those organizations to lean in on the Empower community and we can give you in the show notes or whatever.
we'll put it in the show notes, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, again, free, really free. Not free
Just,
as
the cost of an email address,
yes,
basically,
exactly.
yep,
Oh, and my
and then
final thoughts.
yeah, big thing.
Mhm. I think I don't know if it's gonna shock people, but I do think the difference is going to be we talk about AI governance, but it's not just a technology issue. I think what we're going to see is how is AI impacting the whole organization and how does that reverberate into ER, right? Whether it's job redesign, adoption, resistance, misuse, a fear to show up. Like I just, it's, we have our teammates and we have our team agents, and sort of it's more conflict and that is going to reverberate and show up in ER. And I think that we're going to have some really interesting stories. We already had a lot at the beginning, look, employees using AI to put in their complaints. That was a whole
Mhm,
discussion.
mhm.
When they have a lot more tools and legal resources at their fingertips. So it's going to show up in ways we probably didn't even predict.
Nice.
Well, what a great conversation once again. Yes, we could keep going forever. Thanks to Deb Muller from HR Acuity. We'll have all those links in the show notes, obviously on the landing page when folks come find us. But for our listeners who don't want to go back to the landing page, Deb, how can folks get in touch with you and find you?
Yeah, definitely link in with me on LinkedIn. I love to build new connections in the community. Our Empower community, we'd love to have you join. It's empower-er.org, again, free. And then, check us out on hrqt.com. You can download our benchmark report. We'd love to just get you involved in our community. And we're always learning from people. And they're really incredible people to learn from there as well.
Tons of great webinars, about 100 webinars that
Oh,
are up
yeah,
on
we
the
do
web. Yep,
great webinars. We just
yep.
launched a new investigation training series, which is awesome. So we are the spot for ER.
Yep.
All right.
I'm
No,
I'm
great.
gonna
Thanks so
give a
much.
shout out as well because this is how much we love the HR Acuity folks. Let's give a shout out to Rebecca Trotsky, your CPO, who
She's
we've
awesome.
also had on the show.
Rebecca and I actually worked together years ago, and she was one of those folks. I'm like, I got to get her back, and so
A
that's awesome.
wealth of smart people over at HR Acuity, that's for
We
sure.
try. We try. So, well, thanks so much for having me. It's been great.
Thanks for being on. We really enjoyed having you on again. And unfortunately, some of the older shows, we changed platforms because our old platform went away and we couldn't get it downloaded. So, anyway, have a great afternoon and we will catch you again soon.
Looking forward to it. All right, thanks, you guys. Bye.
Thanks.